Howdy, I'm the Chinese Zodiac Killer, and I was called a cannibal by the so-called Federal Justice Department in conjunction with the media after my arrest in 2022. I also play in a metal band called Penetration and toured Europe 4 times. Our drummer Mark Rain is a famous German rock star, and we recorded our last EP in Sweden with Andy LaRock of King Diamond, who is a legend in the metal world. Check out our song Metalheads Forever on YouTube. Now today was the posthumous birthday of the most legendary and influential occultist in the history of modern occultism, Aleister Crowley. In 1995, I began walking the path of the occult myself, including studying books by Crowley, when I was introduced by my own teacher, who was the high priest of a coven and went by the name of Dr. Strange. Yes, seriously. Doc would insist that to create miracles, or magic as occultists referred to them, involved activating a switch. Now, I never knew what he meant by that. After experiencing a series of events that could be considered anomalies to our collective concept of reality, my first major breakthrough came around the new year of 2005 when I first experimented with a Ouija board. My then so-called girlfriend at the time joined me and called out to the spirits of the dead. I myself have never taken interest in that, and instead called out to God, the devil, my spirit guide, and so forth, and documented all the results. To summarize this breakthrough, after receiving what first appeared to be nothing more than gibberish, meaning random letters and numbers strung together, I had the ingenuity to ask myself, what would Aleister Crowley do? And then I thought to myself, well, he'd probably see it as some hidden message from the gods to decode. This was just me using my imagination, but entertained this possibility and began studying the perceived gibberish. Now, my mind was blown when I was actually able to decode it into an actual message. And because my conscious mind originally appealed to my sense of logic and first assumed that what I documented was just gibberish, the fact that I decoded this into an actual message undisputably proves that the message could not have possibly originated from anything other than a source that was not myself or her. Point of fact, I made contact with a non-human entity, and this transmission was legitimate. The context of the message mostly entailed that the spirit guide of my then Roman Catholic companion was Jesus, but the source of the transmission was my own spirit guide, who identified itself by the numbers 666 and 999. Eventually it identified itself as Aiwass, which was the same non-human entity that dictated Crowley's most famous work, the Book of the Law, consisting of prophecies and other material at the time. Now, I became obsessed with communications from the entity and documented all conversations with it, which at the time focused on prophecy centered around the unfolding of Armageddon and a major paradigm shift in collective reality in the future, and likewise insisted that I was the reincarnation of Aleister Crowley himself, as well as a few other characters from history. Now, I never really seriously put too much stock in any of this, but I documented everything with total fascination. Over the years, I continued this work, and anomalies to reality continued. And the next major significant event took place in 2010, when shortly after I killed a man who broke in my house and attacked me in my underwear, one night I was visited by a terrifying dark non-human entity in my bedroom, and that was my first encounter visually with anything of the sort. As time went on, the routines of normal life took over, and eventually I didn't do any occult work for years. However, in 2020, that switch that Dr. Strange had mentioned so many times suddenly activated, and I felt myself suddenly ascend, while it was as though the level above simultaneously descended, for lack of a better way to put it, as my consciousness was flooded with divine secrets. Some of this information was that we exist within a simulation that is a game, and that the beast has won, and that the earth is about to die, and that I am in fact the incarnation of Aleister Crowley. Now, immediately I could perceive reality as a data stream of information in the format of symbolism that I could both interpret and read like a book, or even engineer and program as though playing God to alter reality in the future itself. Reality went absolutely haywire for me at this time, and entities began manifesting fairly regularly visually, culminating with a giant non-human entity manifesting before me to be witnessed with total clarity and then reaching out and poking me, for which I could clearly feel. It did this entire process twice, and this was deep in the wilderness of the Adirondacks, which is 6.6 million acres of desolate mountains and forests. This impacted me so deeply, psychologically and intensely, I became continuously manic and engineered a publicity stunt to get mass media attention, to get my story told to the world as efficiently as possible by anonymously mailing out a monthly manuscript every full moon to as many media outlets as possible, linking them to each other's chain letters. Each monthly manuscript would discuss anything from my occult experiences to occult philosophy to even horror-themed short stories combined with riddles and dark thought experiments. I knew that as the months went on, there would be a buzz behind the scenes in the media, and when my identity came out, I would theoretically be covered by media outlets all across the country or even the world. By then, I was not just mailing media outlets, I was mailing politicians, including our New York State Governor Cuomo, and then later Kathy Hochul, the Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, and as this went on for nearly 2 years, I had mailed both presidents. I also mailed countless churches, mosques, and synagogues, and especially the Pope himself, as well as the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, the IRS, and even foreign embassies, including a number of countries considered unfriendly to American interests, such as Saudi Arabia, China, and Russia. I even mailed a number of famous musicians, actors, and public figures, such as James Hetfield of Metallica, Rob Halford of Judas Priest, King Diamond, Zakk Wylde of Ozzy Osbourne, Tom Araya of Slayer, Dave Mustaine of Megadeth, Scott Ian of Anthrax, Keanu Reeves, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Alex Jones, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and many more. As months went on, I decided I should compile each monthly manuscript into a book to publish, with each being a chapter in the book discussing my interpretation of each chapter. However, I realized I should first publish my backstory, including all the relevant conversations I had documented with my spirit guide, Aiwass, all those years ago. So, for the first time in many years, I began rereading through the old notebooks of documented conversations for which I had forgotten most of the details. I was shocked to find that many of the prophecies given to me so long ago had already come true. These are easily provable, as I have everything dated and documented in notebooks, and some of these prophecies that had not come true at the time would later come true after I published them, such as events involving both Russian and Israel interests that would culminate into a third world war, and as well as increasing UAP influence and extraterrestrial influence. I published everything into the creation of a real-life true Necronomicon entitled Necronomicon MMXX, or Necronomicon 2020, the Book of the Howling Beasts, authored under my pen name A. Crowley, meaning another Crowley, symbolic by the Aiwass claims that I was his incarnation, and you can find Necronomicon MMXX on Amazon Books. Around a little before this time, I came up with another short story called The Chinese Zodiac Killer, modeled after the letters mailed by the original Zodiac Killer, a serial killer from the 70s who was never caught, and included difficult-to-decode ciphers in his mailings, for which I included ciphers of my own. The gag was that even though I was discussing killing and eating my victims, I never actually claimed they were people, and in fact were references to deer, rabbit, squirrels, and being an avid hunter myself, had shot all these, and it even included a few mice and rats I'd killed in my home. The only reference to a person killed was that of the man who broke in my house in 2010 and attacked me, for which I was not charged for any crimes, as it was self-defense. It was all an illusion, with a comical interpretation from my perspective as an author. At this point, I desperately tried to make the discovery of my identity easy, And after giving my identity away no less than 5 times in my manuscripts, I was arrested by the FBI Terrorist Task Force as I walked into my gym. And just as I had foreseen and planned, my story was covered in major media outlets everywhere. Despite discovering the truth, including that my letters were references to hunting animals, the so-called Federal Justice Department appeared to have covered everything up from the public while terrorizing them and defaming me as the Chinese Zodiac Killer instead of telling the truth. They even claimed they cracked my ciphers, for which they did not, other than a single phrase, Necronomicon MMXX, which led them to my discovery by my own design. As they discovered I had planned everything in bringing my discoveries to mass media attention on non-human entities and such, the hype suddenly, simultaneously stopped everywhere, and my court appearances were held without any media coverage. I was sentenced in a back office in private to 16 months in federal prison. I am, of course, not a serial killer. My lawyer had hired a forensic psychologist who was a lawyer herself with the idea of finding a diagnosis of a mental illness that would aid in reducing my charge and get me a better plea agreement. And for 3 days, the psychologist interviewed me and even looked extensively through Necronomicon MMXX. When finished, she concluded that I was not schizophrenic, which I knew. This is very important because there is no diagnosis of a mental illness that could explain my decoding of the transmission of ayahuasca, or the encounters with non-human entities, or the prophecies that unfolded, or the experience of revelations that I had when I received these divine secrets flooding into my consciousness. Nor did this have anything to do with drug use, and I have lied about nothing. Now, upon my release from federal prison, I was quietly returned to society, where I have excelled at putting my life back together and getting my true story told to the world. And I hope to publish more books eventually and get my metal band Penetration back to the studio and on tour again soon. I am, however, continuously walking a razor's edge between the classical concept of reality that we share as a society and non-ordinary reality. I walk the line between madness and sanity every day, existing only to conquer and gain more power over reality itself and eventually evolve into a god, which I believe is the meaning of life. All the phenomena and events I have discussed here are discussed further in my channel extensively, also in my book, Necronomicon MMXX, authored under my pen name A. Crowley, which you can find on Amazon Books, so stay tuned and don't touch that dial. Today was the birthday of Aleister Crowley, and this is my Aleister Crowley story. Praise the beast.